So alhamdulillah, we've come here today to discuss the new book that has come out, the Eminent of Al-Quds by Imām Wahbah az-Zuhayli rahimahullah. I've brought some copies with me, which are available downstairs. So I want to just give you a nice summary of the book, how the book came about, and why now, and what makes it relevant. So this book came about, mashallah, Imām Wahbah az-Zuhayli, I'll start with the original book. Imām Wahbah az-Zuhayli, if you don't know, rahimahullah, is one of the great ulama of Sham, Shafi'i madhab, Ashri in Creed, and was prolific in writing. I mean, Imam Musnan talks about writing, Imam Masud, Imam Nawawi, and Imām Wahbah az-Zuhayli is a proof. He's a proof. Because people often ask, the unbelievers often ask, they said, how is it that someone like Imam Nawawi, Imam Masudi, and these other of the past, how are they so prolific in their writing? Imām Wahbah az-Zuhayli is someone recently who proves that writing can be done. Prolific writing can be done. He only passed away back in 2015. He has well over something like 90 books written, and many of them are multi-volume, right? So, for example, he has 11-volume book, which is well known as Fiqh al-Islam, Islamic fiqh and its evidences. Comparative fiqh, all four madhabs, right, which was finally published, its final edition. You can get it combined with another 2-volume book on Qadaya Fiqhiyya Mu'asira, like modern fiqh issues, and that's like 14 volumes. He also has a fiqh book in every madhab. It's called the Muyassar series. So he has al-Fiqh al-Hanafi al-Muyassar, al-Fiqh al-Shafi al-Muyassar, al-Fiqh al-Hanbali al-Muyassar, al-Fiqh al-Maliki al-Muyassar, which he got checked by ulama of each madhab, given taqreed and said, yes, this is a good book in our madhab. I have Maliki brothers who I asked them, like, is there a nice easy book on Maliki that I can get? They say, yeah, get Imām Wahbah az-Zuhayli's. It's good. It's valid. He has tafsirs. He's written 3 tafsirs. One is called Tafsir al-Wajiz, which is 1 volume. And that's like beginner level, simple, easy to read. Then he has Tafsir al-Wasit, which is 3 volumes, which goes into more detail. It's more like thematic, so he breaks down. He'll take like a group of ayat and break them down. Say these ayat talk about this, and breaks them down. And then he has another tafsir, which is 17 volumes, called Tafsir al-Munir, which covers, as you can imagine, pretty much everything, because it's 17 volumes, right? So he'll take each ayah, he'll go over the different qira'at of the ayah, the differences in qira'at, obviously he'll go over the Arab of the ayah. That's for you, brother Yasser. The Arab is all there. And then he'll go into the mufradat, what do the tricky words mean. Then he goes to the fiqh of the ayah, and then he'll go into the general tafsir of the ayah, breaking it all down bit by bit. So, and that's obviously for the more advanced students. And then, again, there's so many other issues that he touched upon. So he touched on fiqh issues, spiritual issues, theological issues. And there's a good, alhamdulillah, biography here, which I took from, there's a professor in Damascus called Badil Laham, who wrote a really exhaustive biography, and it's on the Sima Chan website, so I summarized it from there. Amazing stuff he covered. So fiqh, usul al-fiqh, creed, tafsir, amazing, I mean, it's nuts. I would say, just in closing, like someone just closing his biography, this reminds me of one time, many years ago, a sheikh from Lebanon came over. He was teaching different sciences here in the UK, and he'd studied in Sham. And he mentioned one of the men he had in Sham in Damascus, who used to always. This sheikh, like when he was trying to push his students to work harder, be more disciplined, he'd always draw a comparison with Imam Nawawi and say, this is how you have to do it. Don't you know that Imam Nawawi would do such and such? Like Imam Nawawi would do 12 lessons a day, or Imam Nawawi would write the equivalent of like this every day of his life. And the students, they got exasperated after a while. They're like, why are you doing this? Why are you comparing this to Imam Nawawi? That's not fair. Right? Like, he was such a prolific writer. He never got married. And the sheikh's response was, he said the same Lord who gave to Imam Nawawi is the same Lord who gives today. Right? Like, that's why you have to see it in that way. Don't think so much about your physical capacity. It's all from Allah's fadl. Yes, Imām Wahbah az-Zuhayli, if you want to talk about like part of his success, yes, it's from Allah, but he also on top of that, or aside from that, I should say, is he was known to have amazing time management. Like, he was very, very disciplined with his time. he was never ever late because he was writing and lecturing and teaching. So he was never late for a class, never late for a lecture, never called in sick. He was always on time and attending his lectures. So very, very punctual and organized. And in one of his last interviews, he talked about his schedule. He said that he could often write 18 hours a day. He could write. So, and then the proof is in his production itself. So this book that we have in front of us that's been translated, this book is originally published 20 years ago, in 2001. And my friend and publisher, Ustad Jalali and Nawa Books, brought this book to my attention. It's very interesting how this all came about, because as you guys are aware, I've been talking about other books like Depression, Anxiety, and Rights of Husband and Wife, and so forth. And then back in December, one of my Arabic students in Bradford, he wanted to do a talk about the importance of Palestine, and he invited Sheikh Mahdi Lock from Birmingham up, and then he asked me to do it. And I'm happy to help out, but I thought, okay, it's my first time doing a talk on a book, on something I haven't written about, right? It sounds better that way if you've actually done a book and you actually talk about a book. So I haven't done a book on this. So he talks, I think he presented the idea to me on Wednesday, I accepted, and then Thursday, Jalaluddin just emails me or texts me out of the blue and says, hey, I found this, would you like to translate this? Oh. Puts it together, and I thought, yeah, and I looked at the length, I'm like, yeah, I can get this done within a month. And sure enough, I got the rough draft done within a month. And alhamdulillah, what we find here with Imām az-Zuhayli is that he, not only is he, this thing about Imām Wahbah, not only is he an expert, an absolute master in fiqh and usul fiqh, but he also studied man-made law. He's also very, very well respected. He had a degree he actually got a degree in law from, I think it was Ain Shams University in Egypt, right? So he knows exactly what, UN Charter and all these, he knows where these people are coming from. So he put it all together to argue why Philistine, and Al-Quds especially, and Al-Aqsa, why this is the property of the Muslims. Why it's ours, why we deserve to rule it, why we deserve to have it, and they are not worthy of it. So, here's my introduction. I can maybe talk about my introduction later, but in the conclusion. So what the Sheikh does is he addresses the point. First of all, we have to talk about the names, and I put it here, the names of Jerusalem. But why I put Al-Quds on the cover, why I put Al-Quds on the cover, is because, again, the Sheikh is stressing the Arab Islamic nature of Jerusalem, right? Now, that's what its name is. It's Al-Quds. It's been called Al-Quds ever since the time of Sayyidina Umar radhiyallahu anhu. Jerusalem has other origins like Jerusalem and so forth, but what he stresses is he starts off by showing that even that their sources agree with it, that Jerusalem, this land that we call Al-Quds, was first settled in about 3000 BC by the Jebusites. The Jebusites, who are linked to the Canaanites, who are essentially like what you could call like a pre- or proto-Arab people, right? They're an Arab people, right? So even I saw one of these, was it Abby Martin? She's one of these pro-Palestine voices from the U.S. Like even she played a clip and she showed how even Israeli politicians, like when they talk about the founding of the Jewish presence of Bnei Israel being in Philistine, they say like this indirect way. They're like, yeah, and then we entered the land in such and such year. It's like, okay, you entered the land, but who was there? Right? They don't actually allude to that. Right? So someone was there before you. Whereas we know that the Jebusites, they're referred to as they're the people who actually settled in the land. They didn't just enter it; they settled it, they established it, they founded it. They're the first people to live there. So this is what he goes over, showing, and this city has had many names. It was called Jebus at one point, after the Jebusites. So he establishes it this way, that this is where it comes from. He says that, again, since that time, the Jebusite Arabs, because they're proto-Arab people, and then we have Islam. So when you look at the vast majority of the history of the last 5,000 years, it's been Arabs and Muslims ruling it. You've only had periodic rule from the Bnei Israel, and then you also had that short, brief period under the Crusaders, from 1099 to 1187. So this is what he lays it down. This is history that everyone acknowledges. So what he goes on to show is he says that over all these years, when has Jerusalem, when has Al-Quds been ruled properly? When has it actually had peace and stability? So he goes to show that under Sayyidina Umar al-Khattab, that is when Al-Quds had political, economic, cultural, and social stability. Because the point, again, on what you can read on the blurb, is he shows that when we compare now with what's happening under the Zionists, is that not only do the Zionists not deserve that land from a historical perspective and from an Islamic perspective, but they've proven themselves unworthy. Because all you see is death and destruction. All you see is chaos. These people are incapable of ruling properly. It's simply not in them to do it properly. So, and the Sheikh Imām Wahbah, he says that it was under the Muslim rule that not only did the Muslims have the right to worship and so forth, but the Jews and the Christians had the rights as well. Whereas it's the Zionists now who are depriving them of their rights. So I would recommend if people have the chance to, the famous American journalist Tucker Carlson, he recently interviewed a priest, right, a Lutheran priest based in Bethlehem, and got him to just speak, like, tell us how the Zionists treat the Christians. And they get persecuted, and they get abused. And we know churches get bombed and so on and so forth. A lot of people in the United States are not happy about the interview, right? Because obviously, someone like Tucker Carlson gets tens of millions of views, and people realize, oh, right? And again, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but do you know why the evangelical Christians are so pro-Zionist? Do you know why they are?
Yeah.
Do you want to say it?
Yeah, because they believe that before the Messiah can come, basically they have to establish the third temple there.
Yeah, the Temple Mount, right? So it's actually it's support, but it's cynical. It's like, yeah, we want you to do it. Yeah, Jesus, that's what they wanted to go ahead and do it, but then they believe that Jesus will come and then smite them, and then they'll get to go up to heaven, right? So it's support, but not really support, right? It's very sick and cynical, very sick and cynical. So then the Sheikh goes on to talk about how when he talks about I'll come to that later. Then the Sheikh goes and talks about, again, we have to establish the history. So he talks about the ayat in Surah Al-Ma'idah 21-22, right, which you can read about where where Musa alayhi salam is trying to lead the Bnei Israel into Jerusalem, but they don't want to fight, right? They say, like, we're going to stay here, qa'idun, right? You and your Lord go fight. We'll sit over here. Now, he talks the wider context, and he says, okay, when Allah said this, was the promise, again, we're trying to refute the Zionist argument, was the promise that they would enter as rulers or merely as residents? And he's like, no, they're not going in as rulers. Allah let them live there. Yes. Okay. So the Bnei Israel, they're given the right to live there, not to rule there. And he quotes Ibn Abbas, and says that the condition is that they enter it as residents, as rulers and owners, because Bayt al-Maqdis is the abode of the prophets and home of the believers. Allah decreed it that it be for the people of disobedience, and he called it Muqaddasa. It's called Muqaddasa. I pure. And he promised Ibrahim al-Khalil alayhi salam the right to live there, not because it was their property. So, and he quotes in Abbas who says it was a gift. Then Allah denied them it because of their evil or disobedience. So they're allowed to live there on the condition that they obey Allah. Because you put it all together, all the prophecies that come together, you think about it, yes, Isa alayhi salam was true. The restoration of the Temple of Sulaiman alayhi salam is Mesh al-Aqsa. It is Mesh al-Aqsa. That's the prophecy. That's the playing out of the prophecy. It's Isa alayhi salam, then the Mesh al-Aqsa, and then Mesh al-Aqsa is the fulfillment of the prophecy. They're talking about some other temple that is fictional, and that's where they're part of where they're also going wrong. So the Sheikh goes on to talk about that how this proves again that they don't have the right to rule based on this historical fact. It was never granted them. It was granted them on that condition. You see, and so the fact that they then disobeyed prophets, and then that they disbelieved in Isa alayhi salam, and then after that disbelieved in Rasulullah, that right from that sort of what they call a God-given right or God's chosen people, that's not valid. It's simply not true. Then, yes. Now, here in this chapter, this is the chapter on chapter 3. This is where he lays out the basic crux of the argument here. So, if the Jews were only living, or the Bnei Israel were only living there, momentarily. The children of Israel, they were only there momentarily for periods of time. And the Arabs were there for the longest period of time in ancient history, and then they ruled it for 1400 years after Islam, after coming of Islam. He says, then we have to establish this. He says, the first is this, is that this logic that, i.e., because our ancestors used to live here so many years ago, therefore it's ours, we have the greatest right to it. He says this isn't acknowledged in international law or any convention. No one acknowledges this, right? He says, if that were the case, we would have to redraw the world map. The Muslims would reclaim Spain, right? Because we were there. 700 years, buddy. Give it back. And then he says, the Red Indians, which the Arab term is the Hunud al-Humar, right? They should get back to the United States. Because it was their land, right? Only 300 years ago, 400 years ago, give it back. If you really want to play that game of it's my land because my granddaddy lived there, or my grandparents lived there, my ancestors lived there, then we're going to have to rechange a lot of things. A lot of people are going to go back in different directions, different places. And then he says, but then the second thing is that even if we assume that this logic is valid, this argument is valid, if we assume that, then the presence of the Arabs in Al-Quds over many years, or many millennia, and through ancient history and Islamic history, shows that it goes back further than the children of Israel. So even if we take that argument and we assume it's valid, then that land belongs to the Arabs and the Muslims. So as this new Zionist occupation of Al-Quds, as is known, is legitimate, because the Charter of the United Nations clearly states that it is not permissible to annex the lands of another state by martial force. And how many resolutions have been issued by the Security Council and General Assembly that condemn Zionist aggression and its excesses? So, then what the Sheikh goes on to do, the Imam, he goes on to explain, and again, because the original title of this book, and I changed it just to focus, because it's broader than that, but the original term was Makan al-Quds fi Diyanat al-Samawiyya, right? So like in the divine religions, right? Obviously divine religion is one, but he does talk about like why Al-Quds is important to the Jews, why it is important to the Christians. But that's not the full thrust of the book. That's only a couple chapters. But it's important to make this point, because we're not in a position, we don't have that supremacist attitude where Jerusalem is only ours, right? Al-Quds is only ours, and no one else is allowed to come in. So he lays it very clear. Okay, why do the children of Israel, why do they venerate Al-Quds? And he lays it all out, again, as the brother mentioned, because of the Temple of Sulaiman alayhi salam, because Dawood was there, and then he quotes different verses from the Old Testament, and then he also talks about the Christian perspective of Al-Quds. Why do the Christians venerate it? And then also because we have Bethlehem to the south. He gives an interesting ruling from the Copts, the Copts of Egypt, because they have a pope, Baba Shenouda, who passed away in 2012. He gave the ruling in his lifetime to his flock that they were not allowed to enter Bethlehem as long as the Zionists were there. He actually took the position of a complete utter boycott, that they're not to enter this land as long as the Zionists are there. Then the Sheikh goes on, and then he lays out, obviously, the long Muslim and Arab perspective of Al-Quds. And he shows, again, the Muslims and the Arabs are the ones who've had the longest periods of rule over Al-Quds. The Arab Jebusites were the first people to settle in the Holy City around 3000 BC. It was called Jebus, as has been mentioned. And then he goes on to mention, why do we honor it? And of course, he says, after the emergence of Islam, the Muslims became very attached to Al-Quds, and it came to hold a special place in their hearts. They made it a holy sanctuary, second only to Mecca al-Mukarramah, right? So that's in the beginning. So in the beginning, it was second only to Mecca. Only to Mecca. Is the first of the two Qiblas and the third holy sanctuary after Mecca and then Medina. And so then he gives on the whole list. He says that, so this is simple history. So the Muslims reclaimed Al-Quds at the hands of Salah al-Din Ayyubi in the year 1187, after it had fallen to the hands of Crusaders in 1099, and then remained in Muslim hands until the British seized it in 1917 during what they call the First World War. Then they made Al-Quds the cap of the British mandate over Palestine, and the mandate in 1948. And then that's when the Arabs and the children of Israel went to war to take the city back. And this is what's been happening ever since, basically. So, why do Muslims validate it? Again, we ruled it for 1400 years. It's the place of the night journey and the ascent, right? The Isra al-Mi'raj. This happened in Al-Quds. This happened in Al-Aqsa. And the beautiful thing about that ayah, where Allah subhanahu the Asra bi'abdi, layla min al-haram al-mashal al-Aqsa, is that this also the event of the Isra al-Mi'raj, this happens before the Hijrah. Right? This is before the Hijrah. Right? Yeah, if I can ask you this question, of course, you'll know what this means. Al-Aqsa. What does Al-Aqsa mean?
Means the furthest.
Yeah, good, the furthest. Or to be more particular, the farthest. We're talking about physical distance. Right? The farthest, right? Now, when do you use the superlative and when do you use the comparative? What's he on about? Okay. All right. If you have the word better, and you have the word the best, when do you say better and when do you say the best?
You say better when you're comparing to something else, and you say the best when you're speaking about something in of itself.
Yes, but you're going to say better if you're talking about two or three things.
It's mutually exclusive, isn't it? It's no comparison.
Yeah. So, my point is, if you're doing comparative, it's two things. Right? I can say Zayd is taller than Khalid. Right? Or Khalid is shorter than Zayd. Yeah. That's when you use the comparative, two things.
So something that's better isn't necessarily the best.
Yeah, sometimes the best. It's just better than one other thing, right? Whereas if you have three or more, then you're going to use the superlative. You're going to say the biggest, or the tallest, or the best, right? So I could say that Khalid is taller than Zayd, but Amr is the tallest, right? Now, here in this ayah, we have two masjids mentioned, right? Allah says Masjid al-Haram, and then Allah says the farthest masjid, not the far masjid. So why is Allah saying the farthest masjid?
Medina.
Get away. So, yeah, that's it. Now, Masjid al-Nabawi doesn't exist yet. It hasn't been built yet, but that's what Allah is alluding to. There's a prophecy in that ayah. Right? The prophecy in that ayah, Allah is saying that we have the Masjid al-Haram and they have the farthest masjid. Right? And there's no other masjid at this point. But obviously the far masjid is going to be Masjid al-Nabawi in Medina. Sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Right? These are these little linguistic nuggets of the Quran. Allah is telling you things indirectly. You pick up. So, the Isra Mi'raj happens in Jerusalem. Happens in Al-Quds. So, and he quotes these ayat in Surah Al-Isra, ayah 1, and Surah Al-Najm, ayah 7 to 17. And he says that these two verses, which affirm that the event of the night journey as said happened on one night, are connected to the Muslims' creed because of the necessity to preserve the Mecca Al-Quds axis from the sacred house to Al-Aqsa under just and balanced Islamic authority, which was and still is the peak of grace and magnanimity. The followers of other religions have always been able to visit the holy sites in Al-Quds and elsewhere. So again, this point that not only do the Muslims have this right because of religiously from what Allah has decreed historically, but also on top of that is their magnanimity. So even if you strip away, you look at everything else, you look, okay, who treats the people best? Who gives people their rights? Who treats people in an organized and civilized manner? It's the Muslims, not this current crop. So then the Sheikh also so these first 2 points. The third point again is yes, the Muslims allow for the sincere worship of Allah therein, and this is how it happens under this Islamic rule, not this Zionist racism, right, which has filled Palestine with all kinds of devastation, destruction, harm, and corruption, as well as the burning of the Masjid al-Aqsa and even some churches. Right? How are people supposed to live in a land and worship, whether they're Christian or Jew or Muslim, when you have this kind of tyranny? Because you have to remember, even Orthodox Jews get persecuted over there, right? Who don't agree with Zionism, who try to do things that they don't agree with the government, they protest the government. They get beaten up. The police beat them up or persecute them. So, then the fourth point he mentions is again that it was the first Qibla, and he quotes the ayah from Surah Al-Baqarah, ayah 144, وَقَدْ نَرَى تَقَلُّبَ وَجْهِكَ فِي السَّمَاءِ, right? And this is the hadith from Al-Bukhari, where Al-Bara bin Azim said the Messenger of Allah saw him pray towards the Bayt al-Maqdis for about 16 or 17 months. But then the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam desired to face the Kaaba, so Allah revealed, right? Allah revealed that verse. So therefore Al-Quds became the first of the two Qiblas, the third of the two noble sanctuaries, right? That's literally the way they say it, right? They say Thalith al-Haramain, which sounds weird, but what it means is obviously the third holy site in Islam. And all of this affirms the existence of the Islamic right to Al-Quds in Palestine and the disavowal of the illegal Zionist appropriation and their criminal aggression. And then he mentions something else, which is that the holy sites in Al-Quds come under a system, including the Wailing Wall. Now, we'll talk about that in a bit. I'll mention this. The Wailing Wall is what we call Had al-Buraq, right? It's the wall of the Buraq. That's where the Prophet ﷺ on the Isra Mi'raj, that's where he let the Buraq stay, right? That's where he tied him and stayed, right? They call it the Wailing Wall. But what he points here is he says that there's a system called Al-Wad al-Rahim, right? Which is like the status quo. And this goes back to the Ottoman days. And this basically means that the ancient remains ancient and nothing new is done to change it, right? So once people have established their rights, we know that the Muslims worship over here, the Christians worship over here in these places, and the Jews worship over these places, and then we leave it as it is, right? It's a system that's been in place for centuries and centuries, and we just leave it the way it is. That's how it's supposed to be. So this system relies on each group or sect maintaining its inherited rights based on decrees from the Sultan. So it goes back to the Ottoman age. Ancient customs and known mutual goodwill. And the British mandate, when they were there, they could maintain the system. Lo and behold, they actually maintained the system. So all of these clear evidence show that the Muslims and the Arabs have the most right to oversee Al-Quds, and the Arabs should rule it permanently. Then he goes on to talk about what's happened, of course, with the ancient Islamic and Christian landmarks, the Arab nature of Palestine, what's happened with the Israeli control of Al-Quds, and what's happened with it. And he talks as well about the Judaization of Al-Quds, this idea of where they're trying to wipe out the history, right? They try to show that, they try to make it look as if Christians were never here, Muslims were never here, right? Again, it's this very cynical approach. I read about this a long time ago. I read this back like 1990s. That there was a man called William Dalrymple, a Christian from Scotland, who wrote a book called From the Holy Mountain, and he toured all the Christian sites, going from Greece all the way through to Egypt. Right, so he started in Mount Athos in Greece, and he went through Turkey. They went to like the old Christian centers. So like for them that would be like Istanbul, Constantinople, Antioch. Then go to Damascus. Then go to also Al-Quds, and then come to Alexandria. And when he passed through what is called Israel, he noticed, he saw himself how they just make parking lots where there used to be a famous Christian site or a famous Muslim site. They're deliberately trying to just erase the history and change it, make it look like, oh, we were always here. No one else was ever here. Right? That's that approach. So, then the Sheikh makes the point that this is the point that he comes up in it's also mentioned in the blurb, is that we reject the internationalization of Al-Quds. So that's another trick they try to do, is they try to make it look, well, it's a city for everyone, and therefore it should be under the control of the United Nations, and nations. It's like, no. Why should the United Nations have charge of it? Why should it be the British or the Americans or the Chinese? It's not theirs. It's not their land. The Muslims already have a system in place where they rule that place, they rule it justly, and the Jews and the Christians have the rights therein. Why do we need internationalization? Internationalization is in fact just going to be a step towards the Zionist idea, right? That's just it's like a facade, it's a ruse to get them to move more towards the Zionist takeover of Jerusalem. So then the Sheikh talks about more in chapter 8 about the Al-Quds in the clause and the Zionist aspirations. And what he lays out here is that we should not see this as Zionism, again, that there's any sort of attempt to reconcile or what they call naturalize, right, or normalize, right, normalization. I'm trying to translate to the Bia. Sorry. Naturalization is what happens when you get your passport, by the way, right? If you come from abroad, right? Because before you get your passport, you weren't natural. What they call it. So, what the Sheikh argues in this chapter is, and this is a point that I put here in my introduction. I'll refer to the introduction now. So, because Imam Wahbah made this point, and because again, Gaza, the land of Gaza has been attacked many times, right? The Zionist entity has attacked Gaza many times over the years, not just now. There have been several bombings and invasions and so forth and incursions. What Imam Wahbah said is, he said, you have to understand that this is not merely a land dispute or a property dispute. This is about defending Islam itself. And he said, the hatred that these people have hits at the core of Islam itself. It's not simply about the land or who owns what. It's deeper than that. And lo and behold, and he said the people of Gaza, are really at the forefront of that fight. And I remember the people in the Sima Sham website in Damascus, like Imām Wahbah's people who runs the website, they reprinted that quote. They republished that quote on social media back in, I think this is maybe late October or November. And lo and behold, like within a day of that post going up, the IDF, the Israeli Diaper Force, that's true. You do know, don't you? Right? Pampers is the preferred brand. So the Israeli Diaper Force, some people say IOF, some people say IDF, right? IOF, the Israeli Occupation Force. If I say IDF, that's what I mean. Right? I'm not defending anything. So when the day after that, they completely bombed and flattened the branch of Al-Azhar in Gaza. Right? There's an entire Azhar University branch in Gaza, and they bombed it. They completely destroyed it and devastated it. I was like, okay, what does that have to do with anything? Because again, the target is Islam itself. Right? The people of Gaza are in the way. That's what this is about. So, what Imām Wahbah points out in this chapter, very similar to what Imām Wahbah is saying, is that this isn't about simply that, oh, okay, we have some sort of naturalization with them or normalization with them, that after that everything will be hunky-dory. No, they have greater ambitions than this. And he quotes their own books talking about this, how they're thinking about the Euphrates, they're thinking about the Nile. One of their texts, at least in this chapter, one of their texts even mentions where they talk about taking over a place called Yathrib. Right? Al-Madinah al-Munawwara. Right? It's not going to stop there. You can't think, okay, well, if I just give them... No, they have greater ambitions. There isn't a point where they're just going to massacre and kill and execute and then reach a boundary, reach a certain border and say, okay, we're happy with this. No, they're going to keep going. So there's no way to reconcile that point. That's what you have to be aware of. Then he goes on, chapter 9, to talk about the Arab point of view, and then he talks here more about the Christians and the Muslims of Palestine, and how, again, this is one thing Imām Wahbah makes in the appendix as well, is that when the Crusaders came from Europe, 1,000 years ago, the Crusaders tried to get the Christians in Palestine to join their side. And the Christians in Palestine said, no. Why are you coming? We're actually happy, we're well looked after, we're taken care of. Why do we join you? Right? And you can read about this in a book by Noam Chomsky called Rogue States, chapter 12. I remember this book because he actually talks about how when the Crusaders, when they actually arrived in Al-Quds in 1099, there's the papal bull. I don't know why they call it papal bull. Maybe bull is a prefix. But 1099, when they arrived there, and this in our own records, they say that we just killed everything. We slaughtered everything. Men, women, children, animals, dogs, goats, everything. So much so that we were up to our ankles in blood. Right? This is in 1099. And Noam Chomsky, that book, okay, who's Jewish, by the way, and in that book, he calls it Rogue States because referring to you-know-who, right? Certain Western countries and their settler colony. And he says, and he calls that chapter a legacy of war. Like, where does this come from? Oh, look, these people have a track record. And then he takes it back, says, look what they did in 1099. Right? They literally just came, they just killed everything. And again, when he says everything, that includes the Christian inhabitants. They just killed everything, so much so that they were up to their ankles in blood by their own admission. So that has to be borne in mind that, again, the Christians, they work with the Muslims. They side with the Muslims in these issues. And he also talks about this issue. Now, in this chapter as well, he brings up, again, this is something that I have to talk about, is, as a branch, or not a branch issue, but stemming from this, is that from the Shar'i point of view, Al-Quds there's two things about it. It's hard to say which one takes precedence. First of all, Al-Quds and Philistine is Dar al-Islam. Dar al-Islam means it's the land where the Muslims rule. Dar al-Islam does not become Dar al-Kufr. Dar al-Islam stays Dar al-Islam. And all the Madhahib agree about this. The only difference of opinion that they have, there's some difference between, I think, the Hanafis and the rest, between what if it's surrounded by other Dar al-Kufr countries, right? So this is the issue of Spain. Like, okay, so Spain, do we have to reclaim that, or do we have to let that go because it's actually surrounded by other Dar al-Kufr lands? Whereas Philistine is not like that. Philistine is surrounded by other Muslim countries. So that's the first thing. Dar al-Islam stays Dar al-Islam. The other thing, which is probably more significant, is the issue of Awqaf. The fact that the entire land is Waqf. There are Awqaf everywhere. Now, the nature of a Waqf, what in English call an endowment, the way we understand a Waqf is a serious thing that is not to be messed around and tampered with. I'll give you an example, just to write this down. If I take a book, right? Let's say I take this book. I could take this book and I could make this a waqf for this masjid. Okay? And as the waqif, the endower, I could write out a waqfiyah, right? Which would be a document. And I would say, this book is a waqf for Allah, and it is for the benefit of the people who attend this masjid. Okay? Now, legally, what does this mean? When we talk about an item, when you talk about any sort of like thing or substance, right? There are two ways of owning a thing. There are two ways of owning a thing, right? And this is very, very important to understand when you think about renting. When you think about renting or lending something out. There's what's called the ayn and what's called the manfa'ah, right? You can own the thing itself, and then you can own the use of the thing. There's two ways of owning something, right? So, if I rent a car from Imam Hussein, right? Let's pretend it's his Porsche outside.
That's his.
Oh, shall I? I'm sorry. I thought.
We're gifting you that. I'm borrowing it off him. I've got the use of it from him.
All right. Okay. There we go. Now we have an example. All right. So let's say if it's Imam Hussein's car, and he lends it to brother
Sajid.
Brother Sajid. Yeah. Brother Sajid. Okay. Now, in the short sense, what that means is Hussein. Before he rents it out, Imam Hussein, he's Sahab al-Ayn and Sahab al-Manfa'ah, right? So he owns the thing and the use of the thing. When he rents it out to Brother Sajid then becomes the owner of the use, right? So Hussein is Sahab al-Ayn, but Brother Sajid is now Sahab al-Manfa'ah. So what does that mean? That means that while Brother Sajid has it, Brother Hussein can't use it, right? He can't walk over to his house and, yeah, it's my car, I'm taking it. I've seen some landlords do this, by the way. Ever been in a situation where you rent a landlord or something, the guy just walks in like, yeah, it's my house. Like, yeah, it's your house, but I pay rent, right? So in the same way that Brother Sajid, when he has the car, because he's Sahab al-Manfa'ah, he's the owner of the use and not the thing itself, he's not allowed to sell it, right? He can't sell it or give it away or put it in his will or anything like that, right? Because there's two distinct things. Now, what happens with a waqf? So this is one of the amazing things about waqf. Now, we all know that Allah is the owner of everything, right? Obviously, everything belongs to Allah. When you make something a waqf, Allah legally comes into the contract, right? So if I say this book is a waqf lillah, it's a waqf for Allah, for the beneficiary, and it's for the benefit of the people who attend this mission. What that means is, Allah becomes Sahib al-Ayn. Allah is now the owner of this thing. Right? And then everyone else who attends the masjid is the Sahib al-Manfa'ah. So what that means is, it stays in the masjid, and then people come to the masjid. If you want to take off a shelf and read it and study it and teach it, whatever, that's fine. But you can't take ownership of it. Right? I remember when I did this book on waqf several years ago, and I read a fatwa by Sheikh because a student of knowledge, he asked this question. He said, like, my local masjid, I gave my local masjid a whole bunch of books as a waqf. I gave them like books of fiqh and tafsir and all this stuff. And it's been several months, and I've noticed that no one's really reading them or using them. Can I take them back? And the sheikh was like, no, it's done now. It's done, right? You've made that's a waqf for Allah. That's it. It's a loss, right? So if you want to go to the masjid and read the books, that's fine, right? Because you come under the rubric of the beneficiaries, but you can't take them back. Now, you take that argument, and then we have to talk about, okay, and again, the other thing I said, let me finish this. The other thing I will do, because again, let's take the example of book. Let's finish the example of book. When I have this book, the point is, this is my sadaqah jariyah, right? This is my sadaqah jariyah. I want to get the reward for this after I go back to Allah. So while I'm in my grave, I want to get the reward for all the people who make use of this book and benefit from this book and so on and so forth, right? So the normal thing for a waqif to do when he writes out his document, because obviously a document is preferred if he has something more complex, like it could be a masjid, it could be a hospital, it could be a school. At the end of it, I'm going to write, most likely, something like, وَلَعْنَةُ اللَّهِ عَلَى مَنْ يُخَالِفُ هَذَا. Right? وَعَلَى مَنْ يُغَيِّرُ هَذَا. Meaning, may Allah's curse be upon whoever contravenes this, or contradicts this, or changes this. Because I want my sadaqah jariyah. Don't mess with this. Right? So, if you take that you take that on board, and you realize that everything there is a waqf one way or another, right? Whether it's a school, whether it's a hospital, whether it's a masjid, and so on and so forth. All these other things. Why are they changing it? You have no right to change that. And again, this goes back to what we have. Again, as I've shown many times, there's no objection here to Christians living there, to the Jews living there. There's no objection to them living there. The problem is, why are you setting a mistake, and why are you messing around with the awqaf? Those awqaf are sacred. They're not meant to be. You cannot destroy them. The only way a waqf can end is if the thing itself falls into disrepair. Right? So, for example, again, back to the example of the book. If this book were to like fall apart after 100 years, then fine, that's in my waqf. Right? But it's absolutely haram for someone to chuck it in the bin or destroy anything like that. That's absolutely haram. That's the only way, and that's what we mean by. That's why when the fuqaha talk about waqf, they talk about like it has to last perpetually. It doesn't mean it has to last forever and ever, but it has to have a sense of being perpetual, right? So like you wouldn't make a candle a waqf, right? You light it, right? Or a loaf of bread, right? This is my waqf. It's going to last 5 minutes. No, that doesn't work. That's going to last a long time. So then we get to the yes. We'll move on to the other points about at the end, yes, about the Christians and the Jews. Then we get to the conclusions. There's one other thing I want to mention here before I finish is back to the point about the Hat al-Buraq, right? And again, this is why Imām Wahbah is so brilliant, because he brings in international law for this. When the British had their mandate over Palestine between roughly 1918 and 1948, part of the Zionist aggression started during that time, right? Where they tried to claim ownership of what they call the Temple Mount, which is actually Al-Aqsa Sharif, and they tried to claim ownership of what they call the Wailing Wall. And the Muslims and the Jews started having back-to-back arguments about this. So what the British did, in order to maintain some sort of guides and neutrality, is they brought in some Swiss and some Dutch and some other people to be like arbiters, right? And just to listen to the arguments. So let the Jews bring forth their arguments, let the Muslims bring forth their arguments, and the conclusion that they gave was that wall is absolutely, without question, Muslim property. This was done in 1930. And this decision was reprinted, because this actually went under like the League of Nations and so forth. They affirmed this, they said yes, it's Muslim property. And this was reprinted under the United Nations in 1968 when they took over, when the Zionists took over Jerusalem again. So again, these points are all go and stress this point about the fact that, again, this is Muslim land. Now, we get here to the recommendations and conclusions, and what we have to understand here, I'm going to tie this in with what I said in the introduction. We have to understand that the issue here is Zionism. This is Zionism. This is not about Judaism, per se. This is about Zionism. We have to start asking questions about, and this is why I put in the introduction, this is some of what Imām Wahbah said was his conclusion. We have to start asking questions as to why this thing exists. Because it is effectively, it's a settler colony, right? It's a relic of the British Empire. I put here in the introduction, we have quotes from the, I should read it out to you here. The first, one of the British governors of Palestine said this. He said that we want to form a little loyal Jewish Ulster in a sea of potentially hostile Arabism. Like Northern Ireland, right? Like we want to have our little colonial outpost over there in a sea of potential hostile Arabism. Okay, well, if you really care about the Jewish people, why would you do that to them? That's cynical. If you really care about them, like, why would you put them in a situation where you're going to create hostility anyway? Right? Like, Brother Yathrib, I love you. If I'm going to give you a house, I'm going to kick Hussein out of his. Right?
This is living in the Porsche.
Yeah. There's enough room in the back to eat like that. It's fine. Right? But I'm not going to. How is it a favor? How am I doing you a favor by creating enemies for you?
Well, you got them out of Europe, didn't you?
Yeah, that's the other thing, right? They didn't give them Bavaria.
Nope.
They didn't give them any plot of land in Europe. They said, no, we'll put you over here. Because again, you guys understand, anti-Semitism is their legacy. The Holocaust, the pogroms, right? The Nazi Party, what the Russians did, what the English did. And it's their legacy. And one of the things they did, it's like, okay, why are they so proficient in the field of money lending? Because that was the only thing they were allowed to do in Europe. They were barred from other trades. Money lending was the one thing they could do. So they lend money and interest. Then the Christians will be around like into debt. And then the Christians say, hey, we're all in debt. Who do we owe the money to? Those guys. They come out. And then and then they get kicked out. Where do they go? So lo and behold, they end up in the Muslim world. So the Muslims don't have that issue. You want to live here, you want to trade here, fine. So you have Muslim populations in Morocco, the Jewish populations in Morocco, in Egypt, and all other places in Yemen. And they're left alone to live in peace and so forth. So anti-Semitism is not our legacy, it's their legacy. And that is why we have this situation. So this guy said, this is Ronald Storrs, he says, yeah, we wanted to create a little Jewish Ulster in a sea of potentially hostile Arabism. And then I mentioned that a member of the infamous Black and Tans, right? These are the people who brutalized Ireland, right, on behalf of the British Empire. So one of these guys who brutalized the innocent Irish people in Galway, these same people went to Palestine and brutalized the natives. It's the exact same people, like flesh and blood people. And he says this, he said this about the Palestinians. He said, most of us were so infected by the sense of our own superiority over these lesser breeds that we scarcely regarded these people as human. Sound familiar? Right? Like, where is this coming from? Then he says this, and then I mentioned the one that after the British, then you have the Americans take over, and you know, the current president, in one of his saner moments, he said, if there were not an Israel,
we'd have to make one.
Exactly, we'd have to invent one. So again, the question is, whose interests are really being served here? Because again, we have so many Jews throughout the world who are protesting against this. In this country, in the United States, you have prominent figures like Norman Finkelstein or Noam Chomsky or Max Blumenthal or Dan Cohen. Some people, they're protesting against this stuff. So we have the question is, this isn't really about Judaism. This is about imperialism. This is an Anglo-American imperialism thing, and they don't like Islam. That should be obvious. And they want to control the area. They go after the oil. It's a command and control center for them. That's what this is about. So these are the kind of questions I put forward in this thing. So we should not be fooled by all these talks about, you know, freedom of speech and all that kind of stuff. So what this is about, just to conclude, is that what the Imam says in his conclusions is that, again, we do not recognize this settler colony And it's upon us to, this place has to be liberated. It has to be liberated. Not through terrorism, not through killing innocent civilians, but what the people of Gaza and what the people of Palestine want is because this land was sort of just given away from them without a fight. Because again, this is the thing, this you have to respect about Palestinians. They're not going to the United Nations or to the Americans and saying, "Oh, give us our land," but they're not begging. They're saying, "Just give us a fair fight." Because this is how lands change. Historically, this is how lands change. Military, army versus army. This is how lands change. All they're saying is give us a fair fight. Let us fight for our land. But this is how lands change. You don't have like peaceful handovers of land. People fight for it. It's happening right now. Ukraine isn't saying, "Here, Russia." Right? They're fighting over it. That's normal human activity. But I'll finish on this point here. And it's an appendix by Imām Wahbah, and ties in everything. And it's called the core of Islamic laws is the establishment of complete justice. And this is what we should all really take away from here. And he talks about how the Muslims under Sayyidina Umar al-Khattab, how they took over Sham. And he mentions this. He says, first of all, he mentions Egypt. He says, "You know that the commander of the believers, Umar al-Khattab, radiallahu anhu, restored the rights of a Coptic youth against one of the sons of Amr al-As. He summoned Amr al-As and his son to Al-Medina, coming from Egypt, and he summoned the Coptic youth, this Christian Coptic youth. The commander of the believers, Umar, punished the son of Amr al-As and said to him, Amr al-As, his words that have been immortalized by history, Al-Amr, since when have you enslaved people when their mothers bore them free?" Right, so Umar al-Khattab, there was a dispute because this son of Amr al-As, he abused a Coptic youth, and you can read the full story here in the footnote. Sayyidina Umar, he summoned them both to Medina, and he judged in favor of the Coptic youth, and he let the Coptic youth physically punish the son of Amr al-As for what he had done. And so this is how we establish justice. Now, the other example, I want people to focus on this. So he says, another example is the conquest of Sham, which was also an Islamic conquest. But how was Sham and its lands before? It too was groaning under the yoke of Byzantium, i.e. the Roman Empire. And the people of Sham had suffered terribly from Byzantine colonization. Similar idea. And it was Byzantium's habit to incite the Jews against the Christians and to incite the Christians against the Jews. And to strive breathlessly to keep them fighting and raging and having this hatred towards one another. And this was in order to root Byzantium more firmly on that land. This is kind of what's happening now. It's the same idea. You're just playing people off each other out of imperialistic ambitions. Byzantium incited the Jews to desecrate the place where the Christians believed, or the place where the Christians believed our master Isa, Sayyidina Isa alayhi was born, in order to incite the Christians against the Jews. Then the Romans would incite the Christians to defile the noble rock, Al-Quds, which the Jews revere, to provoke more enmity between the two groups. So what was the result when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala willed that Sham be liberated from the yoke of Roman colonization? The Muslims and the religious leaders in Jerusalem gathered to sign the peace treaty, but the Christian clergy refused to sign it except in the presence of the commander of the believers, Umar. They demanded that he be there. Umar, saying that Umar was informed of this, so he came. And when he arrived in Al-Quds, he headed to the noble rock, which we can have the Qur'an. He found a lot of dirt and filth on it. He removed his cloak and began to clean the noble rock with his cloak. Then everyone around Umar rushed to compete with him in this sacred deed. Then he headed to the place where the Christians say our master, Sayyidina Isa was born, the place of the Church of Resurrection. As soon as he arrived at that place, he saw rubbish and dirt piled up there as well. So he removed his cloak again and began to clean that place with his cloak. And the people around him quickly followed suit. This is how the Muslims rule. So he says, reflect on what Byzantium was doing by inciting hatred and sectarian war among people of the book, and what Islam did. I did not say Omar, which was the other, right? Because Omar is acting as a person on behalf of Islam. Well, I know. These other people were fanning the raging flames of war between the brotherly people of the book, while Islam, represented by the person of Omar, united everyone in harmony and conjugality. He cleaned both well-known places with his cloak, and history speaks in detail of the speech that I mentioned to you in brief. Was anyone among the Christians in Sham forced to adopt Islam? Not one. They were not forced, and history said the number of Christians in the Levant in Sham remained equal to the number of Muslims until the miserable remnants of the Crusades appeared. So, I say all of that to keep you, to summarize this book, and to make it clear that this is how the Muslims rule things, and this is why we should be in that power, why Al-Quds is supposed to be ours, and it's not about hatred of any people, it's not about the disrespect or oppression of any people, but it's about reestablishing justice, reestablishing the truth, and reestablishing what is supposed to be, the situation is supposed to be. Well, alhamdulillah,